this is a rapidly developing situation outside of Paris, as we all know. So let's go back to our live desk. Rebecca Cooper there is watching things. Rebecca, what are you seeing and hearing right now?
Well, Leon, I just wanted to update you because you have been talking with Congressman Moran and Brad Garrett about the very topic that so many people are wondering about. How are these four people interconnected? Are they part of a larger cell? And we're getting some new information thanks to the British newspaper The Telegraph that is starting to profile the various people. We've got the two Kouachi brothers, one of whom, Sharif, who was convicted on terrorism charges in 2008 and spent some time in prison. We also have two hostage takers, Amali Koulibaly, he is now deceased, and his girlfriend, Hayat Boumediene. She is the one at large that they're all looking for. And here's what we're learning about how they're all interconnected. As you all were speaking about whether or not this is part of a larger cell, they are reportedly all part of a growing radical network within France called the Bout Chaumont Network. These are people who all study together about the mosque that we've been talking about so much in the last couple of days, led by Abu Hamza. This is the same mosque, Leon, where Richard Reed was radicalized, the shoe bomber, where the 20th hijacker, so to speak, was radicalized. And this is also where these gentleman and Hayat all got to know each other. She is the girlfriend of Amali, and while he spent time in prison, she was waiting him out and helping them plot other attacks. Both Amali and Sharif were later said to be a part of a plot to break out a radical Islamic Algerian who was serving time in prison. So there were many different times in the past few years where they have come into contact, have been interconnected, have been plotting within that same network, Leon. And as we know, Hayat Boumediene is still at large. They are still looking for her. Simultaneously, they are trying to determine whether anyone else involved in these terror networks may be plotting any additional attacks inside France or elsewhere today. Leon.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. Now, the two lead suspects in the Charlie Hebdo massacre are reportedly dead after a firefight with French authorities. An army of police had the town of Dammartin on lockdown, where the Kouachi brothers held a hostage. They're suspected of killing 12 people and wounding many more. But who are they? CNN's Nick Robertson takes a closer look at the backgrounds of those two brothers.
Sharif Kouachi is 32, a French citizen with a criminal past. In 2008, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for being part of a jihadist recruitment ring in Paris that sent fighters to join the conflict in Iraq. He and another man were about to set off for Syria. From there, they planned to reach Iraq, where war was raging. But he was arrested in 2005. At trial, he reportedly told the court he was motivated by U.S. troops' abuse of detainees at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, where U.S. soldiers posed for photos with detainees in uncompromising positions. Sharif Kouachi was convicted and sentenced in 2008. But Bloomberg TV reported he didn't actually go to prison after the trial. Half of his 3-year sentence was suspended. The rest spent in pre-trial detention. 2 years later, 2010, he was charged in connection with a foiled plot to break an Algerian Islamist out of prison, a man who bombed a Paris commuter rail station in 1995. But prosecutors later dropped the charges, reported Le Monde. Sharif's older brother is Saeed, 34, also a French citizen. According to CNN affiliate BFM TV, he left an ID document at the scene. Like Sharif, he was known to police. In 2005, the Libération newspaper reported the brothers were both staying in Paris with a French man who converted to Islam. And in 2010, Saeed's name came up during the investigation into the prison break plot. But according to Le Monde, there wasn't enough evidence to keep investigating him. Nick Robertson, CNN, Atlanta.
Now, as we've been telling you, 3 terrorists, including the 2 suspects in Wednesday's massacre at our newspaper office, have been killed as police ended 2 separate hostage sieges today in the Paris area. Aaron McLaughlin is in Paris, and we heard from you earlier, Aaron. Can you tell us, what was it like there when police stormed the suspects? You were there firsthand. Give us your sense of what it was like.
Well, from the scenes that we've seen unfolding on French television, it was absolute chaos at both sites of these hostage situations. One happening not far from here to the northeast of Paris in a suburb. Loud explosions were heard, automatic gunfire. And according to French television, the two Kouachi brothers actually came outside of the print shop and opened fire on police. And thankfully, we're hearing that the hostage in question, a male, is now safe and sound, and almost simultaneously in an eastern part of the city, more explosions, more gunfire heard, and sadly we're hearing now from authorities that 4 people died in that attack. Not clear if that includes a hostage taker himself, but incredibly we're also hearing that his accomplice, a 26-year-old by the name of Hayat Boumediene, is now at large. So there's currently another manhunt underway here in France tonight. There's also another detail that we've just learned that I want to bring to you. A BFM journalist spoke to someone who purported to be, BFM, is a French media outlet. This journalist spoke to someone purported to be Sharif Karachi, the younger brother, as well as Ahmedi Koulibaly, the main suspect in that kosher shop attack. And Karachi told this journalist that they were sent by Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Now, we are trying to get more information on that, and we'll bring you that as we get it. Back to you, Leon.
All right. Thank you so much, Aaron. Now, joining our panel now is the Council of Islamic Relations, Zainab Chowdhury, and Fahim Yunus, the president of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Men Association USA. Thanks to both of you for being here. Now, Fahim, let's start with you. You've written about all of this, and I would like to get your perspective on this. We've talked about this sort of the conversations that are generated by events like this. What are your thoughts right now? I'm sorry. We're having a bit of a problem. Fahim, hold on to that thought. We'll get back to you in just a bit. We're having some problems with your microphone. We'll get that straightened out. But let me turn to you, Zainab, and ask you the same exact question. We talked together about this just a few weeks ago in the wake of the first emergence of the ISIL terror threat. And you have to feel like here we go again having the same conversation.
Leon, it's absolutely horrific. When we learn about what happened in France and Paris, our hearts go out to the family. We condemn this brutal attack. There's absolutely no justification in Islam for it. The fact that this is again being linked to a religion of over 1.5 billion people in the world, peaceful people who want to abide by the laws of the land in which they reside. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous to all of us. We've been working to not only raise awareness of the fact that this is not something that Islam condones, but also convey our condolences to the families and to the victims, their families, and all French people who are affected by this. Yeah,
and again, we look at the differences between the French society, the way it's structured, and here. If we look at this and try to determine what threat we might actually face here. So much has been said about how the Muslim community in Paris in particular has been marginalized, almost ghettoized, if you will. There's a bit of a difference of the way that assimilation has worked here in this country versus there.
Absolutely.
You think that is the answer, or is the jury still out on that?
I feel like that actually might make things more difficult. For example, the fact that I wear a headscarf, I would not be able to attend public schools, or I would not be able to work for the government. There is definitely a very clear, distinct marginalization of Muslims in France that I think has alienated the segment of the population. Unfortunately, it's helped contribute, along with a lot of other factors, it's helped contribute to a sense of the other, where a lot of folks feel like they're not part of society. And unfortunately, there's been this huge wave of Islamophobia that swept across Europe, not only in France, but we've seen marches in Germany where thousands of people have protested against what they view as the Islamization of Germany or of Europe. There's a very strong anti-Muslim sentiment. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that disconnect hasn't helped to address these
But
issues.
Many people say the reason that exists is because a lot of folks think that, a lot of non-Muslims think that Muslims don't speak out enough against this sort of thing. And again, that's what we've talked about before. I'm going to get back to Fahim before I let you answer that. We do have his microphone established. Fahim, again, let me go back to you with what we first started with, and I will turn to the point we were just discussing here. What exactly are your thoughts as we sit here once again having this discussion about radical Islam Islam and the violent aspects of it that they're taking over the world's attention right now.
Leon, I completely agree with what Zainab was just saying. Yes, there is a lot of Islamophobia, and I empathize with that because me and my family, we are the victims of that. But I think enough has been said about the what, when, where, and how of the story. I would like to peel off the layers of this poisonous onion, if you will, and understand the why. Why is it happening? You have to understand the trigger event here is the insult at Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But you have to also then question, insults used to happen during the lifetime of the Prophet, but nobody went ahead and killed anyone. So when did it start? What motivated these people? And for that, you don't have to go 1400 years ago into Quran. All you have to do is go 40 years ago and look at, there is a very tangible, very meaningful answer to that why, and that is the penal code. Those are the blasphemy laws that Muslim countries have upheld from Morocco to Algeria to Pakistan to Indonesia. There are several Muslim countries where these laws have been not enforced but abused. To give you an example, in Pakistan, in 1984, blasphemy laws were enacted. There were 14 cases in the history of Pakistan. 40 years prior to that law was enacted, and since that law has enacted, there are 1,300 cases. We are generating terrorism, we are generating intolerant societies, and we are telling our children that the best way to settle an argument is to shoot your opponent. This is not the teaching of Islam. This is not the teaching of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And that is why I think it's very important to recognize that, because we can talk about all the mechanics we want. That is what is fueling that hatred. Yes, the honor of Prophet is extremely dear to me as an Ahmadi Muslim. I'd rather give my life than take somebody else's life to withhold and uphold that honor. And that is what our imams, unfortunately, are not always teaching. You have to, someone can say, well, in France, in the Western countries, there are no such laws and there's no legal cover. But what the imams do have is their bully pulpit. And I want to make sure that we're teaching our children that this is not the real Islam, that in Quran and in the life of the Prophet, the issues were not settled that way. In Quran, there is not a single verse that supports blasphemy law, and through the life of the Prophet. And unless we go to that root cause, these cases will continue to emerge.
All right, Fahid, there you go. You put your finger on something that Zainab was getting to that I have to come back to. I know you're frustrated when the rest of the world says that Muslims aren't doing enough to stop this. Why is there no sense of consensus about what is appropriate in terms of a response to blasphemy or an insult to the Prophet? If there is no consensus amongst Muslims, and if you yourselves can't find a way to settle that, how in the world can you expect the rest of the world to do it for you?
Leon, a couple points that I'd like to make. First of all, one thing I want to point out is, so there is a sense that Muslims do not condemn Islam. I think it's very important to correct the record on that. Muslims actually are very vocal, not just in the United States, not only in France, but all across the world, in vocally condemning Islam. A really quick 5-second Google search of the terms, Muslims condemn Charlie Hebdo attack, yields 2.7 million results in 0.4 seconds. I think the argument that Muslims do not condemn Islam, do not condemn terrorism, it does not hold water.
As someone who has done that Google search a number of times in the past 4 or 5 days or so, I can agree with you 100%. There's no question about that. But what we keep coming back to is, if there is no consensus among Muslims about what exactly is a proper response to an insult, what is the worst offense in Islam, to insult the Prophet or to kill an innocent. We've had this discussion before. There are some who say one thing and some who say another. If it's not settled amongst Muslims, how do you help us understand where we should be in this debate?
It's really important to also understand that there's a lot of context behind this attack, this horrific attack. There are some reports that indicate that the reason, the logic or the reasoning behind why these brothers perpetrated this attack is because they were actually incensed by what happened at Abu Ghraib, the human rights abuses at Abu Ghraib. There's foreign policies and domestic policies that come into play. I think it's really important to differentiate between religion and politics. And I think that there's a lot of confusion where people think that, oh, this is is a response to a religion or theological aspect of Islam. That's not the case. Islam does not allow targeting of innocent people in any case. There is verses in the Quran that clearly say that there is no compulsion in religion. The fact that these individuals might use religion to justify their own ideologies and justify their own actions, that's something that they have to be held accountable for. But to expect 1.5 billion Muslims to automatically condemn the actions of a very select, very fractional fraction of the small fraction of the population, it's not fair. We didn't ask all of Christians to condemn when Anders Breivik conducted his mass terror attack in 2011, in which, in his 1,500-page manifesto, he referenced Christianity multiple times. But there wasn't this expectation from Christians all around the world to also condemn that. Our hearts go out to the families of the victims, and there is absolutely no justification for this kind of attack in Islam.
Well, you mentioned going online to get more information. Let's do right now, go back to our newsroom. Our Mike Kinnear has been watching what's been happening on social media. This discussion has got to be bubbling up like crazy today. He's standing by now at the live desk. Mike, what are you seeing and hearing on the post that you're reading?
Well, Leon, I would say that the conversations on social media really reflect the last 45 minutes of conversation you've been having. But let's start by orienting our viewers to what happened in Paris and near Paris today. So we had two different scenes. The city center of Paris here, just on the outskirts, on the eastern side, is where that kosher grocery store is located, where those multiple hostages were held, and we learned of multiple fatalities there. Then on the outskirts, to the northeast of the city center, in an industrial park not far from Charles de Gaulle Airport. It's about 25 miles away between these two locations. Starting at that primary location, we have a lot of pictures from the scene from journalists who were covering these events, this standoff, very tense situation with many police officers, a very strong security presence there, and you can see the just barrage of police vehicles responding. Of course, the entire nation, the world, stopping to watch these events unfold inside that barricade situation. Following police into that area there near the industrial park, and helicopters, of course, overhead. We understand that there were, at sundown, there were explosions and gunfire as the security forces and SWAT teams moved to the roof. You can see here they're dressed in riot gear. Again, here's another look at the building. You can see a couple of officers moving to the roof of that building in this coordinated response there. Let's go back then to the other location here, closer to the city center. This is the grocery store, the kosher grocery store, where again we saw a very visible police presence earlier this afternoon. The entire city really came to a halt. We understand the highway circling the city center of Paris was shut down for a time, that schools, hundreds of children on lockdown as police shut down the city and circled this barricade situation. Here you see a policewoman holding a rifle. A lot of media on scene as well, of course, covering these events minute by minute. And there's a pretty dramatic picture here showing them ducking down, photographers with their cameras at the ready to capture any moment, every moment in this entire situation. Now, speaking of the media, I want to show you on social media some of the dialogue that's happening. Just give me a moment here to pull this up. And I can show you, on Facebook, we asked our viewers to tell us what their thoughts were on the Washington Post, among other media outlets, sharing that controversial cartoon, in particular, many controversial cartoons by Charlie Hebdo, the satirical magazine. And we got viewers' takes on this. Max Dex says, free speech is awesome. Jessica Huffer said, every single newspaper in the free world should publish them. Also hearing from Carol Barnett saying with free speech comes common sense. I think this was not smart. Hope I am wrong. Playing Russian roulette, referring to the Washington Post and other media outlets. Julie Donovan Collins saying definitely changes my opinion of the paper in a positive way. And Doreen Kahn saying I don't really care if they run them or not. It doesn't change anything. Now let me just quickly exit out of this and show you one more post on social media that I thought was interesting. This man here, Fahim Yonis, having multiple posts going viral online today. The one that really caught our attention was, he says, new media rules, and saying make a racist, sexist, anti-Semitic joke and it's bad judgment, mock Prophet Muhammad and it's free speech. And of course, he's there with you on the panel, Leon, so we should also note a couple of other posts that have gone viral saying, let's pray for the mental health of people who condemn the Charlie Hebdo tragedy but support blasphemy laws. So very controversial topic on the free speech side of this. But again, minute by minute, we're still getting new details about that remaining female suspect that police are hunting for.
All right, thank you, Mike. And I'm glad you were able to highlight some of the comments from our guest, Fahim Yunus. He's been very, very busy, both with his fingers and with his voice today. But you bring up this whole topic of freedom of speech and the debate that this whole atmosphere now is generating about that. Now, that's something that was addressed during this afternoon's briefing from the State Department. Take a listen.
I think anyone around the world, and you've seen everyone from President Obama to Secretary Kerry express concerns about what we saw happen in France and what that means about freedom of speech and the need to continue to press for that. And clearly, around the world, even prior to this attack, we've all been at, on alert about the risk of terrorism.
Well, joining us on set to talk more about that is Gene Policinski from the Newsroom, and of course we've got Fahim Yunus back with us. Gene, let's start with you. You were at the epicenter of this at the Newsroom.
Yeah, we had the rally that came to us really, and as a place where free speech and really freedom of religion, as well as assembly, petition, and press are celebrated. And you know, we're seeing what I think is developing is the sort of quintessential intellectual debate around the world for the 21st century, and it's whether or not what I would call the high principle of free speech and freedom of expression and freedom of religion in its broadest sense is practiced, or whether we go to sort of this lowest common denominator where we have a government set the rule in terms of what would be the majority faith or what would be blasphemy, what's allowable to be said, what's allowable to be printed. And in a way, and I agree with our earlier speaker, that in many ways those laws produce the kind of intolerance that in name anyway they're intended to defeat. They really do produce a sense of disenfranchisement, of favoritism. You know, we believe in something from 1791 when we adopted the First Amendment, the marketplace of ideas, and that the antidote to speech you don't like, to criticism, to even insults, is more speech, not less.
Okay, let's take this from the theoretical to the real.
Sure.
Okay, that may be all well and good, but when lives are at stake, and I'm talking about not just necessarily the lives of the general public, the lives of the journalists.
Sure.
That in this case, where someone would be so animated because of their use of freedom of speech to go to their headquarters and then gun them all down. If you're the editor who has to make that decision, that's got to be a tough position to be in. I know that many of the major publications and the broadcasters in the United States decided to not air them, and they've been called cowards because of that.
Yeah, and I think that's very unfair. You know, again, when the original cartoons were published in 2005, the question arose, why were there only a handful, a very few number of newspapers in America? And I said, ironically, having the right to make that decision produced an editorial result that's not that uncommon. Material that would offend a segment of your readership that you could report on without showing those images. We could all describe them. We could talk about the prophet with the turban, with the bomb in the turban. You could describe those. You didn't have to show them. Editors make those kinds of decisions all the way. If you really look at what subsequently happened in Europe about publication, many of those publications ran the cartoons not because of their intrinsic news value or even to make an editorial point, other than to tell their governments, you can't stop us from doing that. It was more of a political statement. So what became, at least I guess in the judgment of the original editors, something to do with their editorial decisions, became very quickly a political decision. So having the right to determine whether you run it or not is actually very liberating. I think it's up to every editor to make those decisions, and editors make those decisions all the way. You know, in terms of the risk, if you look back at the history, we have the Journalist Memorial at the Museum. It goes back to the early 1800s. Editors have been making those decisions, journalists making those decisions for at least 170 years, if not longer. We report on issues of race, we report on issues of crime, we report on issues of drugs. If you look around the world, while these deaths are amazingly tragic, there's another 60 to 70 to 80, depending on the organizations who define these things, track. Those journalists died, thugs who run drug cartels, politicians who will eliminate somebody. You know, journalists risk their lives every day. So it's not, in some sense, that kind of instant decision to this. Listen, if I were running a daily paper, I'd be looking over my shoulder a little more. I might increase security at my front door, but I think you have to say, I will make that editorial judgment as I see fit, and you have to continue to do that.
Well, there's many who say that if you don't print those cartoons, essentially the terrorists win. And that's essentially what a lot of people are saying right now. Yunus, Fahim, rather, you've already been out on this today. You've started this discussion with us, as a matter of fact, this afternoon.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Leon, and I believe this is the tragedy here, that both sides have compromised their core values in this whole debacle. If you think about it, the Muslim side, I think we have compromised our own principles of freedom of expression that Holy Quran and Prophet Muhammad gave us. But as Americans, we have also compromised the core value of free speech, because what was the genesis of free speech? Free speech is there to speak the truth against tyrannical governments. It is not designed to go and hurt a beleaguered 1% vulnerable minority in a country. Muslims are 1% in America, and that is why I make the point about other vulnerable minorities. This is not censorship. This is good judgment, and we have done that without compromising free speech. We don't use an N-word for an African American. We don't use an F-word for someone who belongs to the gay community. We don't mock Holocaust, because we have realized that these are tender spots. We respect those things, and that is beautiful. That is not compromising our free speech. Yep. We validate the hurt that this causes to those communities, and that is all. I'm not asking, as a Muslim, I'm not asking for special treatment, Leon. I'm simply asking for equal treatment. We have told the world over and over again that any insult for Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is extremely hurtful for us. Will I ever advocate any punishment for that? Absolutely no. All right. You can offend me all you want, but all I'm trying to tell you over and over again that it hurts. And here's the last part and the irony. There is a famous person who once said, the greatest jihad is for someone to stand up and speak the truth in front of a tyrannical ruler. Do you know who that famous person was? It was Prophet Muhammad.
Leon, I just want to make one point really quick. It's really important to also understand that Islam does not prohibit free speech. I think it's really important to differentiate between what these people, these perpetrators of this horrific attack, are, the reasoning behind it, why they did this, and what the actual teachings of the religion are. They claim that they were avenging the Prophet Muhammad. What they actually did, in fact, was they shamed him. They shamed him. They shamed the entire religion of Islam. Islam does not prohibit free speech. There's clear verses in the Quran that say that there is no compulsion in religion. You can't force ideas upon other people. Cool. We can agree to disagree. We can rebut to your cartoons, but at the same time, we uphold the right for people to have their own views.
Well, let me bring in Congressman Moran on this, because this newspaper, which Americans are not familiar with, Charlie Hebdo, but it's been characterized in so many different ways that I think would sort of describe it as a magazine that most Americans here would not want to read, because by design it is provocative and insulting, and therefore demeaning. It's a bigoted publication. As an American congressman with the sense of, I guess, the sense of fair play that we have here, your thoughts on defending a bigoted publication?
It's not a bigoted publication, Leon.
I'm not the one who said that. There are a number of people who
I understand. I'm familiar with the publication, but it offends everybody. It's somewhat like The Onion, which actually I enjoy, but you've got to have a taste for that, and I think The Onion pushes the limits, as does this Charlie Hebdo. But this issue is not about the content of this vehicle for the media to express itself. It really isn't. I may disagree strongly with Rush Limbaugh, but I'm certainly going to defend his ability to express himself. But I do think, though, before Christians feel too self-righteous about this, consider how people would feel if Jesus, who is a prophet within the Islamic religion as well, was depicted in such an unflattering manner. Now, I think religion should be fair game, personally, but that's just personal on my part. I do think that Raheem may say a very legitimate point, and I'm glad he makes that point. But I feel personally very strongly that this cannot be about the content. This has to be about the freedom of expression.
Gene, we're not discussing. I don't think there's much dispute about that, about whether this is about freedom of discussion of ideas. But here's here's a case where something was published that was so provocative that it resulted in people's deaths.
Right.
And the reprinting of it isn't necessarily done, is not necessarily being done to, I guess, to illuminate the story anymore.
Right.
It's this whole idea of if you don't print this, it's a submission to the terrorist. And that's different, isn't it?
Well, it is, and again, this is where these laws that are and those who call for the kind of censorship really work against themselves, because you get this pushback. Again, in the United States, and to take this away from just simply religion, you know, we have a number of publications here, The Onion and others, that are satirical, that stick the pin in pretty hard if you're a politician or if you're a public figure. And you know, one of the things that we prize is this interplay back and forth. And again, you're watching in Europe in the takedown orders now for certain websites where people have an ability to pull material they don't like. You know, this is going to transcend the religious element that is so prevalent in this case. To really come down to this question of, will we be able to speak freely and respond in a marketplace of ideas, or are we going to force all these information sources to pull down information that may offend anybody? And in Europe, you're beginning to see that trend right now, to pull information down, to require websites to take down things that people don't like. And I worry the same sort of pushback is going to happen. You're going to see attempts to circumvent that. You're going to see violent reactions to other kinds of political thought being banned. You know, we've in this country really experimented for 220 years with this idea that if you don't like what I've said, then you talk. And that's what's essential.
I could not agree more. I do think this is a slippery slope. The bottom of that slope is North Korea. North Korea's total censorship.
Yeah.
We're at the top, and I think we want to stay at the top of freedom of expression. Will work itself out, and now's the time to defend freedom of expression.
Well, we've got to wrap this up, and we've got Brad Garrett standing by. I want to get him 10 seconds to give one last final thought here. Brad, is there anything about what we've heard today and what we've seen play out today that's going to serve as any sort of inspiration going forward for anybody, any radicalized person out there that we should be worried about?
Well, I think it really goes to, Leon, how well can we selectively figure out where to place our energy as far as activation. I think the French missed it with these two brothers. I think we missed the Zarnoff brothers in Boston. And so it really goes to, how do you parse that out? I mean, we talked earlier about that you can't assign 20 investigators to one person.
Brad, I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there because we're just out of time. It's so unfortunate, but thank you so much for joining us from there. And thank you as well, folks, for joining us from home. This new terror threat look at what's happening here from Washington. We want to thank all of our guests for the spirited discussion. We will continue to follow this story as it develops, so make sure you keep it tuned right here. Thank you.